Welcome back to Her True Stories. If you're watching this, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. This story will shake you to your core. My name is Pamela Jeffrey, and at 64 years old, I thought I'd seen every kind of betrayal life could throw at me. I was wrong. Dead wrong. It was a Tuesday morning in October when my world imploded with a single text message. I was sitting in my home office in Buckhead, Atlanta, sipping my morning coffee and reviewing quarterly reports for Jeffrey Industries, the logistics empire I'd built from nothing over 30 years. The autumn sun streamed through my floor-to-ceiling windows, casting everything in that golden light that usually made me feel grateful for the life I'd created. My phone buzzed on the mahogany desk. A text from my daughter Zoe in our family group chat. "Don't come for the family reunion. We are cutting ties. I found my real mom." I stared at those words until they blurred. 22 years. 22 years since I'd adopted Zoe when she was 3 years old, pulled her from a foster system that had failed her, loved her like she came from my own body. 22 years of birthday parties, school plays, graduation ceremonies, college tuition, and helping her start her own marketing firm. 22 years of being mom to a little girl who used to have nightmares and would crawl into my bed seeking comfort. The family group chat erupted. My sister Karen. "Wait, what's happening?" My brother Michael. "Zoe, can we talk about this?" My mother, 86 years old and sharp as a tack. "Zoe and Jeffrey, what is this nonsense?" But it was the silence from my son Marcus that cut deepest. Marcus, my biological son, born when I was 28. The golden child who'd never wanted for anything, who I'd groomed to take over the business someday. His silence in that group chat spoke volumes. I set my coffee down with hands that had started to shake. In the reflection of my computer screen, I saw a woman who looked every one of her 64 years suddenly. Silver hair that I'd always kept perfectly styled, lines around blue eyes that had seen too much, wearing a designer blazer that couldn't armor me against this kind of wound.
My phone rang. Zoe calling.
"Hello, sweetheart," I answered, keeping my voice steady. "Don't call me that." Her voice was cold, clinical. This wasn't the daughter who'd called me crying last month about a breakup. This was a stranger. "I needed you to know before the reunion this weekend. I won't be there, and neither should you." "Zoe, honey, what's brought this on? Did I do something wrong?" "You've done everything wrong, Pamela." The use of my first name hit like a physical blow. I found my birth mother 6 months ago. Linda. She's been looking for me my whole life. She never wanted to give me up. The lies started there. I knew Linda Morrison's story because I'd been required to know it during the adoption process. Drug addiction, 3 children already in foster care, multiple arrests. She'd signed away her rights voluntarily after failing to complete court-ordered rehabilitation programs. "Sweetheart, I think there might be some misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding. Linda told me everything. How you swooped in with your money and connections and stole me from her. How you bought me like I was some kind of trophy to make yourself feel complete." Each word was a knife precisely placed. "Zoe, that's not." She told me how you probably only adopted me to make yourself look good. Rich white woman saves poor black child. Great PR for your business, right? I closed my eyes. Zoe was biracial. And yes, I was white. We'd had conversations over the years about race, about her identity, about navigating the world as my daughter. I thought we'd done well. I thought love had been enough. That's not true, and you know it. I adopted you because I fell in love with a little girl who needed a family. You are my family.
No, Pamela.
Linda is my family. She's my real mother. You were just a placeholder. The line went dead. I sat in my office for an hour, staring at that text message, feeling something crack open inside my chest. The family reunion Zoe mentioned was this coming Saturday. Our annual Jeffrey family gathering at my lake house in Blue Ridge. 4 generations coming together to celebrate another year of family, business success, and the bonds that I thought couldn't be broken.
My phone buzzed again.
Marcus finally responding in the group chat. Actually, Mom, I think Zoe has a point. We've been talking, and we think it's time for some changes in the family dynamic. There it was. The conspiracy revealed. My 2 children, the ones I'd sacrificed everything for, had been planning this ambush together. Another text from Marcus. We've all decided that this reunion should be just the real family. You understand. I understood, all right. I understood that I'd raised 2 vipers who'd been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. What I didn't understand yet was how deep their betrayal went, or how much they were about to regret underestimating Pamela Jeffrey. I picked up my phone and typed a simple response to the family chat. Message received loud and clear. Enjoy your last family dinner. Then I left the group chat and made the call that would change everything. Catherine, it's Pamela Jeffrey. I think it's time we had that conversation about Marcus and Zoe's financial irregularities. Catherine Hartwell, my corporate attorney and the sharpest legal mind in Georgia, had been waiting for this call for months. She discovered discrepancies in both my children's accounts, money that couldn't be explained by their legitimate incomes. I'd asked her to investigate quietly, hoping there was an innocent explanation. There wasn't. I was wondering when you'd be ready to hear the truth, Catherine said. How quickly can you meet? I'm walking to my car now. What my children didn't know as they celebrated their clever plan to exclude me from my own family reunion was that I'd spent the last 6 months discovering exactly who they really were. And who they really were was about to cost them everything they thought they were entitled to. The drive to Catherine's office gave me time to think, to plan, and to transform from the hurt mother into the strategic businesswoman who'd built an empire from nothing. By the time I walked into her downtown office, I wasn't Pamela the abandoned parent anymore. I am Pamela Jeffrey, CEO of a $200 million company, and I was done being played for a fool. Catherine's office occupied the top floor of the Hartwell building, all glass and steel with a view of Atlanta's skyline that reminded visitors they were dealing with serious power. I'd been here dozens of times over the years for business matters, but never for something this personal, this devastating. Catherine greeted me with the kind of professional warmth that meant business, not comfort. At 58, she was a force of nature in the legal world, with silver-streaked brown hair pulled back severely and eyes that missed nothing. She'd built her reputation destroying people who thought they were smarter than the law. Pamela, she said, gesturing to the sitting area away from her imposing desk. I'm sorry it's come to this. I settled into the leather chair and accepted the glass of water she offered. Show me everything. Catherine opened a file thick enough to stop bullets. Where would you like me to start? Start with Marcus. She slid the first set of documents across the coffee table. Bank statements, credit card records, transaction histories that painted a picture I didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. Your son has been systematically embezzling from Jeffrey Industries for approximately 18 months. The amount started small, $5,000 here, $10,000 there, but escalated significantly over time. I studied the records with the eye of someone who'd built a business by understanding numbers. Marcus's salary as VP of Operations was $180,000 annually. His lifestyle suggested an income 3 times that amount. How much total? So far, we've identified $347,000 in fraudulent transactions. He's been creating fake vendor accounts, approving inflated invoices for services never rendered, and routing the overpayments to offshore accounts he controls. My stomach twisted. And Zoe? Catherine's expression grew grimmer. Zoe's theft is more sophisticated and, frankly, more cruel. She's been systematically draining the Jeffrey Foundation. The Jeffrey Foundation was my pride and joy outside the business. I'd established it 10 years ago to provide scholarships for children aging out of foster care, kids like Zoe had been. We'd helped over 300 young people attend college, funded mentorship programs, supported group homes. It was my way of giving back, of honoring the journey that had brought my daughter to me. The foundation has a $2.8 million endowment, Catherine continued. Zoe has access as the program coordinator, a position you created specifically for her. How much? She's stolen $125,000 over the past year. But it's not just the money, Pamela. She's been telling the scholarship recipients that funding is being cut due to your changing priorities. She's been destroying relationships you've built with partner organizations, claiming you've become difficult to work with. I felt something cold settle in my chest. She's been destroying my reputation. Systematically. I have emails she sent to foundation partners, board members, and scholarship recipients painting you as an out-of-touch wealthy woman who no longer cares about the cause. Catherine handed me printouts of emails that made my blood pressure spike. Messages to kids I'd personally mentored, telling them their scholarships were being reduced because I was restructuring priorities. Messages to partner organizations suggesting I was considering shutting down the foundation entirely. She's been positioning herself as the real heart of the foundation while making you look like the obstacle to its mission. And the birth mother story? Catherine's smile was sharp as a blade. Linda Morrison. Interesting woman. Currently living in a $450,000 house in Marietta that she somehow purchased 6 months ago despite being unemployed for the last 3 years. Zoe bought it for her. With foundation money. The house is in Linda's name, but the down payment and mortgage payments are being made through a shell company Zoe created. She's essentially bought herself a birth mother who'll say whatever story Zoe needs her to tell. I set down the papers, my hands trembling with rage now instead of hurt. They've been planning this for how long? Based on the financial evidence, at least a year. The emotional manipulation, probably longer. Zoe's been positioning herself as the heart of the foundation while systematically undermining your reputation. Marcus has been establishing financial independence through theft while positioning himself as the real leader of the family business. The reunion is their grand finale. My guess is they plan to announce some kind of family restructuring. Maybe push you into retirement, claim you're losing your edge, suggest it's time for new leadership. I stood and walked to the windows, looking out at the city I'd conquered once already. At 64, I was supposed to be thinking about legacy, about stepping back, about enjoying the fruits of decades of hard work. Instead, I was learning that my own children had been systematically destroying everything I'd built. What are my options? Legally, we have them both dead to rights on multiple felonies. Embezzlement, fraud, wire fraud, tax evasion. I could have warrants issued today. And, personally, Catherine's smile turned predatory. That depends how creative you want to get. I turned back to face her. I want them to understand exactly what they've lost. I want them to realize that crossing Pamela Jeffrey was the worst mistake of their lives. And I want them to live with the consequences for a very long time. Then we don't just prosecute them. We destroy them. For the next 2 hours, Catherine and I planned a campaign that would make Sherman's march to the sea look like a gentle stroll. We would dismantle their lives piece by piece, legally and systematically, until they understood exactly what it meant to betray someone who'd loved them unconditionally. By the time I left her office, I wasn't thinking about the family reunion anymore. I was thinking about justice. And justice, I decided, was going to be absolutely delicious. That evening, I sat in my home office, making a list of everyone who needed to know the truth before my children could spin their version of events. At the top of that list was my mother, Eleanor Jeffrey, the 86-year-old matriarch who'd raised me to never back down from a fight. I drove to her Ansley Park mansion as the sun was setting, my hands steady on the wheel for the first time all day. Mother lived in the house where I'd grown up, a sprawling Tudor that had been in our family for 3 generations. She'd insisted on staying there after my father died 12 years ago, claiming that moving would be giving up. Eleanor Jeffrey didn't give up on anything. I found her in the conservatory, tending to her orchids with the same meticulous attention she'd applied to raising 3 children and managing a household that had entertained governors, senators, and business leaders for decades. At 86, she moved carefully but purposefully, her silver hair perfectly styled even at 7 in the evening. "Pamela," she said without turning around, "I was wondering when you'd come to explain this afternoon's dramatics." I settled into one of the wicker chairs, breathing in the humid air that smelled of earth and exotic blooms. "How much do you want to know?" "Everything. Start with why my granddaughter thinks she can speak to her mother with such disrespect." For the next hour, I told her everything. The financial crimes, the systematic reputation destruction, the bought birth mother, the planned coup at the family reunion. Mother listened without interruption, her hands never pausing in their careful tending of the flowers. When I finished, she set down her pruning shears and fixed me with eyes that had lost none of their intensity over 8 decades. "Those ungrateful little vipers," she said calmly. "After everything you've done for them, everything you've given them, I need to know where you stand, Mother. The family reunion is Saturday. They clearly expect you to side with them." Eleanor's laugh was like cut crystal. "Darling, I didn't raise you to roll over and show your belly when attacked. What's your plan?" I outlined Catherine's legal strategy and my own plans for systematic destruction of their lives and reputations. Mother listened with growing approval.
Good.
"But you're missing something crucial." "What's that?" "You're thinking like a hurt mother instead of like a Jeffrey. We don't just win, Pamela. We dominate. We make examples. We ensure that everyone who even thinks about crossing our family understands the consequences." She moved to a small desk in the corner and began writing on personal stationery. "I'm canceling the reunion. This family gathering will happen when I decide, where I decide, with whom I decide." "Mother, they'll just have their own gathering." "Not at my lake house, they won't. I'm having the locks changed tonight, and not with my money funding it." She looked up with a smile that would have made Machiavelli proud. "Do you know how much financial support I've been providing your children over the years?" I hadn't thought about it, but as she mentioned it, I realized I didn't know how Marcus afforded his downtown loft or how Zoe managed her lifestyle on a foundation coordinator salary. Marcus's rent is $4,200 a month. I've been paying it for 3 years. Zoe's car payment, her private gym membership, her health insurance, all of it comes from the Eleanor Jeffrey Discretionary Trust. The same trust that had helped me start Jeffrey Industries 30 years ago. As of tomorrow morning, they're financially cut off. Let's see how long their newfound independence lasts when they're actually independent.
My phone rang.
"Marcus calling." "Answer it," Mother said. "Let's hear what your son has to say now that reality is setting in." I put the call on speaker. "Mom? Finally. Look, about this afternoon, I think Zoe came on a little strong." "Did she?" I kept my voice carefully neutral. "Yeah, and we want to clear the air before Saturday. Maybe you could come by my place tonight? Zoe's here, and we could all talk." Mother raised an eyebrow. "Damage control mode already." "I'm afraid I'm busy tonight, Marcus. But don't worry about Saturday. Your grandmother is handling the arrangements." A pause. "What do you mean?" "Ask her yourself. She's right here." I handed Mother the phone. Her voice could have frozen fire. "Marcus Jeffrey, this is your grandmother. The family reunion is canceled. When I decide this family is ready to gather again, you'll be informed." "Grandmother, I don't understand." "Then let me be clear. Your trust fund payments stop tomorrow. Your rent assistance stops tomorrow. The credit cards I co-signed for are being canceled tonight. You and your sister have exactly 1 week to explain why you thought stealing from your mother was acceptable behavior. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Grandmother, there's been some misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding is how I raised a grandson who thinks he can steal from the woman who gave him everything and somehow remain in my good graces. She hung up and handed me back my phone with satisfaction. Phase 1 complete. Now they understand they're truly on their own. My phone immediately started buzzing with calls from both Marcus and Zoe. I declined them all. Phase 2. I asked. Tomorrow, we visit your siblings. Karen and Michael need to understand exactly what kind of children they've been defending, and they need to choose sides. That night, I lay awake planning the systematic destruction of my children's lives and feeling something I hadn't experienced in decades. The thrill of a worthy battle. They'd underestimated Pamela Jeffrey, assuming that maternal love would make me weak. They were about to learn that maternal love betrayed doesn't make you weak. It makes you dangerous. Thursday morning arrived with 37 missed calls and 42 text messages from my children. I deleted them all without reading and drove to my sister Karen's house in Buckhead, where I knew I'd find her and our brother Michael having their weekly coffee and gossip session. Karen opened the door, looking concerned. At 61, she'd maintained her Southern belle appearance with religious dedication, perfectly styled blonde hair, immaculate makeup, and a dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Pamela, honey, what in the world is going on? The children have been calling us all night, saying terrible things about misunderstandings and family divisions. Michael appeared behind her, looking every inch the successful corporate lawyer he'd become. At 59, he'd inherited our father's imposing presence and our mother's sharp mind, which had made him formidable in court and intimidating at family gatherings. "Come in," he said seriously. "We need to talk." We settled in Karen's living room, where she'd laid out coffee and pastries on china that had been in our family for generations. The irony wasn't lost on me. By removing my children from positions they'd never earned, I'd created space for people who actually deserved them. The company was more profitable, more ethical, and more innovative than it had ever been under family management. "There's something else," David added. "We've been approached by 3 major corporations wanting to partner with us specifically because of our reputation for ethical business practices. The Jeffrey name now means integrity in the logistics industry." After the meeting, I walked through the office floors, greeting employees who'd stayed with the company through the scandal and welcoming new hires who'd been attracted by our transformed culture. These people had become my professional family, bound together by shared values rather than shared DNA. My assistant knocked on my office door. "Mrs. Jeffrey, there's a documentary crew here for your interview." The documentary about the Foundation's recovery had expanded into a broader examination of family businesses, betrayal, and redemption. The producers had interviewed dozens of nonprofit leaders, business experts, and family members affected by similar scandals. The interviewer, a seasoned journalist named Patricia Williams, settled into the chair across from my desk with the easy confidence of someone who'd covered major stories around the world. "Mrs. Jeffrey, it's been 2 years since your children's crimes were exposed. How do you reflect on that period now?" I considered the question carefully. I think the most difficult part wasn't the financial theft. Money can be recovered. It was accepting that the children I'd raised, the people I thought I knew better than anyone, were capable of such calculated cruelty. "Do you regret exposing them?"
Never.
"I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret holding them accountable. The Foundation serves hundreds of vulnerable children. Those children deserved better than having their futures stolen to fund luxury vacations." "Have you any contact with Marcus or Zoe since their convictions?" "None. Marcus is in federal prison, and Zoe has made it clear she blames me for her consequences rather than accepting responsibility for her choices. Until they can acknowledge what they did and why it was wrong, there's nothing to discuss. Patricia leaned forward. Some viewers might see you as harsh, cutting off your own children permanently. I smiled. Some viewers have never had their life's work systematically destroyed by people they loved unconditionally. Love without boundaries isn't love, it's enabling. I loved my children enough to let them face the consequences of their actions. What would it take for reconciliation? Genuine remorse. Not regret for getting caught, but understanding of the harm they caused to vulnerable children. Commitment to making amends through service rather than words. And time, years of demonstrating that they've truly changed. Do you think that's possible? I looked out the window at the Atlanta skyline, thinking about the question. With Marcus, possibly. He was always more follower than leader. If he serves his time, gets counseling, and commits to honest work, there might be a path forward. And Zoe. Zoe has shown no remorse, no understanding of her crimes, and no commitment to change. She spent 2 years in prison blaming me for her consequences. Until that changes, she's chosen to remain a stranger who happens to share my last name. After the interview, I drove to the new Pamela Jeffrey Center for Foster Care Excellence. The state-of-the-art facility served as a transitional housing and support center for young people aging out of foster care. It was the crown jewel of the foundation's expansion, funded partly by the money we'd recovered from Marcus and Zoe's theft. Dr. Williams met me in the lobby, beaming with pride. "Penny, you have to see the latest placement statistics. 96% of our residents are either employed or in school within 6 months of graduation. We're becoming the national model for foster care transition programs." We toured the facility together. Dormitory-style housing with private rooms and shared common areas, a computer lab with high-speed internet and professional software, a commercial kitchen where residents learned culinary skills, and conference rooms where they met with counselors, mentors, and potential employers. In the library, I found Deshawn tutoring younger residents in mathematics. He'd graduated from Georgia Tech with an engineering degree and was now working for a major construction firm while volunteering at the center on weekends. "Mrs. Jeffrey," he called out when he saw me. "Perfect timing. I wanted to tell you about the engineering project I'm developing." He led me to a display case showcasing his senior project, a modular housing system designed specifically for group homes and transitional facilities. The design reduces construction costs by 40% while improving energy efficiency and creating more private space for residents. 3 states have already expressed interest in pilot programs. I studied the detailed plans and cost projections, impressed by the sophistication of his work. "Deshawn, this is remarkable. You could revolutionize how we house vulnerable children." "That's the plan. You saved my life, Mrs. Jeffrey. Now, I want to save others." As we continued the tour, I reflected on the unexpected gifts that had emerged from the worst betrayal of my life. The foundation was stronger, the business was more ethical, and young people like Deshawn and Keisha were building careers dedicated to service rather than self-interest. That evening, I attended a small dinner party at my mother's house. At 88, she remained sharp as ever, hosting intimate gatherings for family and close friends who'd weathered the scandal with us. "Pamela," she said as we sat in her garden after dinner, "I have something to tell you. I've been thinking about the will." I tensed. Even now, discussions of inheritance felt fraught given what my children had done. "The trust funds I established for Marcus and Zoe are being redirected to the foundation. They've forfeited any claim to family money through their choices." "Mother, are you sure? What if they change? What if they truly make amends?" Eleanor's smile was steel wrapped in silk. "Darling, people show you who they are. Your children showed you they're thieves who steal from vulnerable children. I prefer to leave my legacy to people who will honor it rather than plunder it. And the business? Goes to you as always." but with a provision that it can never be inherited by Marcus or Zoe unless they've spent at least 10 years in legitimate service to others. And I mean service, not self-serving charity work for tax benefits. I thought about the ultimatum my children had delivered 2 years ago, trying to cut me out of my own family. They'd succeeded in a way they never intended. They'd cut themselves out permanently. There's something else, Mother continued. I've been in touch with Linda Morrison. I looked up sharply. Oh. She's been clean for over a year now, working as a counselor for women in recovery. She asked if she could visit sometime, to thank me for the way you handled the situation with grace. What did you tell her? That any woman brave enough to give back stolen money and rebuild her life honestly is welcome in my home anytime. The next week brought a call that surprised me. Marcus's attorney, informing me that my son wanted to see me. He's being released next month, David Sterling explained. He'll be on supervised probation for 3 years, but he's completed several rehabilitation programs and wants to make amends. What kind of amends? He'd like to speak with you about working for the foundation. Not in a paid position as a volunteer. He wants to help the children he stole from. I was skeptical. Mr. Sterling, your client has shown no genuine remorse, only regret for getting caught. What's changed? Prison, Mrs. Jeffrey. He spent 18 months thinking about what he did and why he did it. He's completed anger management, addiction counseling, and financial responsibility courses. He claims to understand now how much damage he caused. Claims. Yes, ma'am. That's why he wants to prove it through actions rather than words. I agreed to meet with Marcus, but only at the foundation offices with Dr. Williams present. If he was truly committed to making amends, he could start by facing the people whose lives he'd affected. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in Dr. Williams's office. I arrived early and spent a few minutes walking through the scholarship program offices, reminding myself of what was at stake. Marcus appeared at the appointed time, accompanied by his probation officer, and looking nothing like the entitled young man who'd once strutted through these halls. Prison had aged him significantly. He was thinner, grayer, and moved with the careful humility of someone who'd learned hard lessons about consequences. "Mom," he said quietly, not approaching for an embrace he knew wouldn't be welcome. "Marcus." Dr. Williams gestured for everyone to sit. "Mr. Jeffrey, you requested this meeting to discuss volunteer opportunities with the foundation. Can you explain why?" Marcus kept his eyes down, his hands folded carefully in his lap. "I stole money that was supposed to help kids like I used to be, kids who needed someone to believe in them. I want to spend the rest of my life trying to make up for that." "What do you mean, kids like you used to be?" I asked. He looked up for the first time, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before, genuine shame. Kids who had everything handed to them, but still felt empty inside. Kids who thought they deserved more than they'd earned. Kids who mistook privilege for entitlement and love for weakness. "And what changed your perspective?" "Meeting kids in the prison literacy program who'd grown up in foster care. Hearing their stories about aging out of the system with nothing. Learning what the foundation really does for people who need second chances." Dr. Williams leaned forward. "What kind of volunteer work are you proposing?" "Whatever you'll let me do. Maintenance, filing, data entry. I don't care if it's cleaning toilets. I want to contribute something positive to the organization I almost destroyed." "And compensation?"
None.
"I have a job lined up at a warehouse, night shift, minimum wage. I'll volunteer here during the day, if you'll have me." I studied this man who'd once been my son, trying to determine if his humility was genuine or another manipulation. "What about Zoe?" His expression darkened. "Zoe writes to me sometimes. She's angry, bitter, still blaming everyone else for her choices. She hasn't learned anything from prison except resentment. And you have?" "I've learned that love is something you earn through your actions, not something you're entitled to because of your DNA." I've learned that betraying someone's trust is worse than stealing their money. And I've learned that some damage can't be undone. It can only be balanced by doing better going forward. Dr. Williams and I exchanged glances. His words sounded genuine, but words were easy. Actions would tell the real story. Here's what I'm willing to offer, Dr. Williams said. A 6-month trial volunteer position with strict supervision and limited access to sensitive information. You'll work directly with scholarship recipients on life skills training and career preparation. I'll take it. There are conditions. Any violation of trust, any hint of inappropriate behavior, any sign that you're using this position for personal gain, and you're permanently banned from foundation property. I understand. And I added, this doesn't constitute reconciliation between us. This is you beginning to make amends for the harm you caused. Whether we ever have a personal relationship again depends on years of demonstrated change, not months. Marcus nodded. I understand. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want the chance to do something good with the rest of my life. As we left the meeting, I felt cautiously hopeful for the first time in 2 years. Not hope for immediate reconciliation, but hope that Marcus might finally be learning the lessons I'd tried to teach him as a child. Time would tell if his transformation was genuine or just another performance by someone desperate to regain what he'd lost. Friday brought a development I hadn't anticipated. Linda Morrison called me directly. I was in my office reviewing quarterly reports when my assistant announced the call. For a moment, I considered refusing it, but curiosity won. Mrs. Jeffrey? The voice was rough, weathered by years of hard living. This is Linda Morrison. I think we need to talk. Do we? About Zoe. About what she's been telling me to say. About what's really going on here. I paused. Where would you like to meet? An hour later, I sat across from Linda Morrison in a diner on the south side of Atlanta, studying the woman who'd given birth to my daughter 25 years ago. She was younger than me by several years, but looked older, with prematurely gray hair, weathered skin, and the hollow look of someone who'd battled addiction for decades. She paid off my mortgage, Linda said without preamble. Told me all I had to do was play along with her story about being the mother who'd been looking for her all these years. And you agreed. Linda's laugh was bitter. Lady, I've been homeless twice in the last 5 years. Someone offers to buy you a house. You don't ask too many questions. She pulled out her phone and showed me text messages from Zoe, scripts essentially, telling Linda exactly what to say about their reunion and how I'd stolen Zoe from her. But the thing is, Linda continued, I know the truth about why I gave her up. And it wasn't because you stole her. It was because I was strung out on crack cocaine and couldn't take care of myself, let alone 4 kids. I studied this woman who'd become an unwitting pawn in my daughter's scheme. Why are you telling me this? Because yesterday, some fancy lawyer lady came to my house asking questions about where the money came from for the house. Started asking about tax implications and legal consequences of accepting money that might be stolen. Catherine had been busy, and because Linda's voice softened, Zoe showed me pictures of her childhood. All those birthday parties, graduations, family trips. You gave her everything I never could have given her. Everything I never even tried to give her. She leaned forward, her eyes filling with tears. I got 3 other kids, Mrs. Jeffrey. All taken away because I was too strung out to care for them properly. I never looked for any of them because I knew they were better off without me. But you took the house. Hell yes, I took the house. But I'm not going to lie in court about you stealing my daughter when the truth is you saved her. I felt something shift inside me, a piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Would you be willing to tell the truth publicly? If it means that girl understands what she threw away, yes. You gave her the life I never could. She ought to be grateful, not trying to tear you down. That afternoon, I called an emergency meeting with my attorneys, my siblings, and my mother. We gathered in the conference room at Jeffrey Industries, where I'd made countless business decisions over the decades. This felt like the most important decision of all. "We have Linda Morrison's cooperation," Catherine announced. "She's willing to testify that Zoe paid her to lie about the adoption circumstances and that she never tried to find Zoe because she knew she was better off with Pamela." "What about Marcus and Zoe's response to our ultimatum?" Mother asked. Catherine's smile was sharp. "They hired their own attorney, a criminal defense lawyer named David Sterling who specializes in white-collar crime. He called this morning wanting to negotiate a plea deal. Which means they're terrified of going to prison and ready to admit guilt in exchange for reduced consequences." Michael leaned back in his chair. "What are you thinking, Pamela?" I looked around the room at the people who'd stood by me when my own children betrayed me. My family.
My real family.
"I'm thinking it's time for a press conference." The press conference was scheduled for Monday morning at the Atlanta Press Club. I spent the weekend preparing, working with Catherine and a public relations firm to craft a statement that would tell the complete story without sensationalizing it. Sunday evening, my phone rang one last time. It was Marcus. "Mom, please. Don't do this. We'll pay back every penny. We'll do whatever you want. Just don't destroy us publicly." I thought about the scared little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, about the toddler who'd followed me around the house, wanting to help with everything, about the young man I'd been so proud of when he graduated business school. "Marcus," I said softly, "you destroyed yourselves. I'm just making sure everyone knows the truth. We made mistakes. You didn't make mistakes. You made choices.
You chose to steal from foster children.
You chose to humiliate the woman who raised you. You chose to try to destroy my reputation and my life's work. We can fix this." "No, sweetheart. You can't. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. They can only be replaced with something new." Monday morning, I stood at the podium in the Atlanta Press Club wearing my best navy suit and my grandmother's pearl necklace, looking out at a room full of reporters, business leaders, and community activists. Catherine sat in the front row, along with my mother, Karen, and Michael. "Good morning," I began, my voice steady and clear. "My name is Pamela Jeffrey, CEO of Jeffrey Industries and founder of the Jeffrey Foundation. I'm here to discuss a painful family matter that has become a matter of public interest due to its impact on the foster care community we serve." For the next 20 minutes, I told the complete story. The systematic theft, the manipulation, the lies about the adoption, the bought testimony. I presented evidence, played recorded conversations, and laid out a timeline that painted an undeniable picture of betrayal and greed. "These are not the actions of children making mistakes," I concluded. "These are the calculated choices of adults who believed that family love would shield them from the consequences of their crimes." A reporter raised her hand. "Mrs. Jeffrey, will you be pressing criminal charges?" "My attorneys are reviewing all options. What I will say is that actions have consequences, and theft from vulnerable children will not be tolerated regardless of who commits it." "What message do you want to send to other families dealing with similar betrayals?" I paused, thinking about the woman who'd read that devastating text message just 1 week ago. She seemed like a different person now, weaker, more naive. That love without boundaries becomes enabling. That protecting someone from consequences doesn't help them grow, it helps them become worse. And that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone face the full weight of their choices. After the press conference, I drove to the Jeffrey Foundation offices and called a meeting with the scholarship recipients who'd been told their funding was being cut. 18 young people, aged 17 to 22, all aging out of foster care, all depending on the foundation for their educational futures. I looked at their faces. Faces that reminded me of Zoe at that age, hungry for opportunity, desperate for someone to believe in them, and felt my resolve crystallize into something unbreakable. I want you all to know, I began, that your scholarships are not only secure, they're being increased. The Jeffrey Foundation isn't going anywhere, and neither is my commitment to each of you. A young woman named Keisha raised her hand tentatively. Mrs. Jeffrey, we heard that MS. Zoe said you were cutting our funding because you didn't care about us anymore. The knife twisted deeper. Even in her theft, Zoe had been deliberately cruel to these kids who'd already been abandoned once. That was a lie, I said firmly. Zoe Morrison, and yes, she's no longer using the Jeffrey name, stole money from this foundation, and then told you I was the one hurting your futures. She wanted you to blame me for her crimes. A young man named Deshawn spoke up. Why would she do that to us? We didn't do nothing to her. Because, sweetheart, she needed villains for her story. She needed you to think I was the bad guy so you wouldn't question where your money really went. I spent the next hour explaining how the foundation actually worked, showing them the real financial records, and promising them that their educational dreams were safer than ever. By the time they left, several were crying, not from sadness, but from relief and gratitude. As they filed out, Keisha lingered behind. Mrs. Jeffrey, I just want to say thank you. Not just for the money, but for not giving up on us even when your own daughter hurt you. Keisha, honey, I want you to remember something. Family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up, who keeps their promises, who fights for you when things get hard. You all are more family to me than the people who share my DNA. That evening, I sat in my office as the sun set over Atlanta, reading resignation letters from both Marcus and Zoe. They'd agreed to Catherine's terms rather than face criminal prosecution, but their letters were filled with self-pity and blame rather than genuine remorse. Marcus's letter blamed misunderstandings and financial pressures. Zoe's blamed me for forcing her to find alternative funding sources for the foundation. Even in defeat, they couldn't accept responsibility for their choices. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This isn't over. You've destroyed your own family for money. You'll regret this. I showed the message to Catherine, who was working late in my office, preparing the final legal documents. Probably Zoe, she said. We can add harassment to the charges if she keeps it up. Let her threaten me. It just proves that, even now, she doesn't understand what she's lost. Tuesday brought vindication from an unexpected source. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution ran a front-page story about the case, interviewing several of the scholarship recipients and painting a clear picture of who the real victims were. The headline read, Foster Care Advocate Exposes Family Theft Scheme That Targeted Vulnerable Youth. The article detailed how I discovered the theft, how Zoe had manipulated both the scholarship recipients and Linda Morrison, and how the foundation was not only surviving but expanding its mission. They interviewed Keisha, who said, Mrs. Jeffrey saved us twice. Once from the system, and once from the people who were stealing our futures. My phone rang constantly that day. Business associates expressing support. Community leaders praising my courage in exposing the truth despite the personal cost. Other parents who'd faced similar betrayals from adult children sharing their stories. But the call that mattered most came from Linda Morrison. Mrs. Jeffrey, I saw the news story. I want you to know I told that reporter the truth about everything. About how Zoe paid me to lie, about why I really gave her up, about what kind of mother you've been to her. I appreciate that, Linda. I also want you to know I'm selling the house. I can't keep living in something bought with stolen money from kids who needed help. I'm going to pay it back to the foundation. I was silent for a moment, surprised by this gesture from a woman who had every reason to keep what she'd been given. Linda, you don't have to. Yes, I do. I may be a lot of things, but I'm not someone who takes food out of children's mouths. Those kids deserve better than what Zoe did to them. What will you do?
Get a job.
Get clean. Stay clean. Maybe try to make amends to my other kids if they'll let me. It's time I acted like the mother I should have been 25 years ago. After she hung up, I sat quietly in my office, thinking about redemption and second chances. Linda Morrison, who'd given birth to Zoe but never raised her, was showing more integrity than the daughter I'd loved and nurtured for 22 years. Wednesday morning brought Marcus to my office, unannounced and desperate. My assistant tried to stop him, but he pushed past her into my office, looking haggard and panicked.
Mom, we need to talk.
This has gone too far. I looked up from the financial reports I was reviewing, taking in his appearance. Designer clothes that now looked rumpled, expensive haircut grown shaggy, the confident bearing I'd raised him to have replaced by something frantic and small. Have a seat, Marcus. He collapsed into the chair across from my desk, running his hands through his hair. The story is everywhere. My phone hasn't stopped ringing. I can't go anywhere without people recognizing me as the guy who stole from foster kids. Consequences, I said simply. I've been fired from every board I was on. The country club rescinded my membership. My landlord wants me out because the publicity is disturbing other tenants. I kept my expression neutral. And I need my trust fund restored. I need help getting through this. The audacity was breathtaking. Even now, facing the complete destruction of his reputation, he thought I would rescue him. Marcus, let me make sure I understand. You stole nearly $350,000 from my company. You planned to humiliate me at a family reunion. You called me crazy and accused me of having a breakdown. And now you want me to give you money to help you deal with the consequences of your crimes? I made mistakes. Stop. I stood up, my patience finally exhausted. Stop calling them mistakes. Mistakes are accidents. What you did was deliberate, calculated theft. You're not here because you're sorry. You're here because you're facing consequences and you want mommy to make them go away. His face crumpled. I don't have anywhere else to go. You should have thought about that before you decided to steal from foster children to fund your lifestyle. What about family loyalty? What about forgiveness? I walked around the desk to stand directly in front of him. You want to talk about family loyalty? I gave you everything. Education, opportunities, unconditional love. I created a position for you in my company, paid for your lifestyle, supported your dreams. And you repaid that loyalty by stealing from me and trying to destroy my reputation. I was under pressure. Everyone is under pressure, Marcus. The difference is that most people don't respond to pressure by committing felonies against the people who love them. I returned to my chair. You want forgiveness? Here's what forgiveness looks like. I'm not pressing criminal charges. You're not going to prison. You get to start over somewhere else, with the knowledge that you threw away a family who would have given you anything. But the money you stole is being returned to its rightful purposes. The trust fund you want restored was canceled because you proved you can't be trusted with financial responsibility. You're 32 years old, Marcus. It's time you learn to support yourself honestly. He sat in silence for several minutes, and I could see the moment when reality finally penetrated. The tears that followed weren't for the pain he'd caused me or the harm he'd done to vulnerable children. They were for himself, for the comfortable life he'd lost through his own choices. I don't know how to live without the family money, he whispered. Then you'll learn. The same way millions of people learn every day, by working, by making honest choices, by building something through your own efforts instead of stealing from others. After he left, I called Catherine with an update. She listened to the conversation with professional interest. He's going to be back, she said. Men like Marcus don't accept consequences easily. He'll try manipulation, threats, maybe even legal action to force you to support him. Let him try. I'm done being manipulated by my own children. That afternoon brought news that vindicated my hardline approach. Zoe had been arrested. Catherine called with the details. Atlanta PD picked her up this morning on a warrant from Fulton County. Apparently, she's been running a secondary scam. What kind of scam? She's been approaching other foundation donors, claiming that you've had a breakdown and that she's trying to save the foundation from your mismanagement. She collected over $40,000 in emergency donations that went straight into her personal accounts. I closed my eyes. Even facing exposure and disgrace, Zoe had continued stealing, continued lying, continued destroying the work I'd spent years building.
She couldn't stop, I said.
Sociopaths rarely can. The compulsion to manipulate and steal isn't something they can turn off when it becomes inconvenient. What happens now? Now she faces criminal charges whether you press them or not. The county attorney is handling the new fraud charges, and they're not interested in plea deals for repeat offenders. That evening, I received a call from one of the donors Zoe had scammed. Margaret Chen, a prominent Atlanta philanthropist who'd supported the foundation for years. "Pamela, I owe you an apology. That girl came to me with such a convincing story about you losing your mind and the foundation being in crisis. I gave her $15,000 to keep the scholarships going while you got help. Margaret, you were trying to help the kids. There's nothing to apologize for. But I should have called you directly. I should have verified her story. Instead, I enabled her to steal more money from the children we're trying to help. You couldn't have known. Zoe is very convincing when she wants to be. How are you holding up through all this?" I considered the question while looking out at the Atlanta skyline, lights beginning to twinkle as evening fell. How was I holding up? Better than I'd expected, actually. "I'm angry," I said honestly. "I'm hurt, but I'm also relieved to finally know the truth about who my children really are. And I'm more committed than ever to the Foundation's mission. The kids are lucky to have you." I spoke with several of them after the news broke. They're devastated by what Zoe did, but they're also incredibly grateful that you fought for them. After we hung up, I called an emergency board meeting for the Jeffrey Foundation. It was time to make some changes that would ensure this kind of theft could never happen again. The board met Thursday morning in the Foundation's conference room. 5 community leaders who'd volunteered their time and expertise to oversee our mission. They'd all seen the news coverage and were eager to understand the full scope of the situation. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, "we're here to discuss how we prevent future abuse of the Foundation's resources and how we strengthen our mission moving forward." For the next 2 hours, we restructured the Foundation's financial controls, requiring dual approval for all expenditures over $500 and implementing quarterly external audits. We also expanded the board to include 2 scholarship recipients as voting members, ensuring that the people we served had a voice in how we operated. But the most important change was personal. "I'm stepping down as director," I announced. "I'll remain as founder and primary benefactor, but I think it's time for fresh leadership that hasn't been tainted by this scandal." Board member Dr. Sarah Williams, a former foster child herself who'd built a successful medical practice, leaned forward. "Pamela, you can't let their crimes drive you away from this work." "I'm not being driven away.
I'm evolving."
The Foundation needs a leader who can focus entirely on the mission without the distraction of family drama. I need to focus on rebuilding my business and my personal life." "Who do you have in mind?" I smiled. "Dr. Williams, how would you feel about taking on the role?" The vote was unanimous. Dr. Williams would become the new executive director, with the full support of the board and a significantly increased budget thanks to the money we'd recovered from Marcus and Zoe's theft. As the meeting concluded, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not for reconciliation with my children. That ship had sailed, but for the future of the work we were doing. That evening, I was working late in my office when security called up. "Mrs. Jeffrey, there's a young woman here to see you. Says she's your daughter. Send her up." Zoe appeared in my doorway minutes later, wearing the orange jumpsuit from Fulton County Jail. She'd been released on bail but hadn't had time to change. The designer clothes, perfect makeup, and entitled attitude were gone, replaced by something smaller and more desperate. "They're really going to prosecute me," she said without preamble. "Yes, they are. Even though you're not pressing charges on the original theft. Zoe, you continued stealing even after you were caught. You scammed donors who were trying to help the children you'd already stolen from. At some point, enough is enough." She sat down without being invited, looking around the office that had been as familiar to her as her own home. "I never meant for it to go this far. What did you mean for it to go?" She was quiet for a long time. "I wanted you to need me. I wanted to be important to the foundation, to the family, to something bigger than myself. You were important. You were my daughter. You were coordinating programs that changed lives. You had everything you claimed to want, but it was all yours. The money, the recognition, the respect. I was just Pamela Jeffries' adopted daughter, playing with Pamela Jeffries' foundation, living on Pamela Jeffries' generosity. I studied this young woman I'd raised, trying to understand how love and opportunity had twisted into resentment and theft. So, you decided to take it? I decided to earn it, to prove I could build something myself, even if it meant tearing down what you'd built." "And Linda Morrison?" Zoe's laugh was bitter. "Linda was perfect. A victim who'd validate my story about being stolen from my real family. All I had to do was pay her enough to play the role. Did you ever stop to think about what your lies would do to her? To the scholarship recipients?
To me?
No," she said quietly. "I only thought about what I wanted." We sat in silence for several minutes. Outside, Atlanta's evening traffic created a distant hum of life, continuing to move forward while we remained frozen in this moment of truth. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you face the consequences of your choices. You'll probably go to prison for a few years. When you get out, you'll have to rebuild your life from nothing, the same way millions of people do every day. And us." I looked at this stranger wearing my daughter's face. "There is no us anymore, Zoe. You made sure of that when you decided to destroy everything I built in your name."
"I'm sorry."
"No, you're not. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry you're facing consequences. But you're not sorry for what you did to those kids, or to me, or to the people who trusted you." She started to protest, but I held up my hand. "If you were truly sorry, you would have stopped after the first theft. You would have confessed instead of doubling down. You would have tried to make amends instead of continuing to steal and lie." I stood up, signaling that our conversation was over.
"Goodbye, Zoe."
"I hope prison teaches you something about the value of integrity, because clearly, love and opportunity weren't enough." After she left, I sat alone in my office, feeling strangely peaceful. The confrontation I'd been dreading had finally happened, and it had confirmed what I already knew. The children I'd raised were gone, replaced by strangers who shared their faces, but none of their hearts. It was time to build something new from the ashes of what they destroyed. 3 months after Zoe's arrest, I stood in the renovated Jeffrey Foundation headquarters, watching Dr. Sarah Williams address a room full of scholarship recipients, donors, and community leaders. The foundation had not only survived the scandal, it had thrived. "When we talk about resilience," Dr. Williams was saying, "we often think about bouncing back from adversity. But true resilience isn't about returning to where you were. It's about using what you've learned to build something stronger." The irony wasn't lost on me. The foundation was stronger because of my children's betrayal, not in spite of it. The new financial controls, expanded board, and increased transparency had attracted donors who wanted to support an organization that had proven it could overcome internal corruption. I watched from the back of the room as Keisha, now a junior at Emory University studying social work, talked about her plans to become a child advocate. Deshawn, in his sophomore year at Georgia Tech, described the engineering project he was developing to help group homes reduce their energy costs. These young people, my real legacy, were thriving. The money Marcus and Zoe had stolen had been recovered and was now funding not just scholarships, but mentorship programs, career counseling, and support systems that would help hundreds of foster children transition to successful adult lives. After the presentation, Dr. Williams found me near the refreshment table. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, using the nickname she'd adopted despite my protests. "I was thinking about legacy," I said. 6 months ago, I thought my legacy was the business I'd built and the children I'd raised. Now I realize my real legacy is standing in this room, talking about their dreams and plans for the future. Speaking of legacy, I have some news that might interest you. She handed me a letter from the Georgia Department of Human Services. I scanned it quickly, my eyes widening as I read. They want to name the new foster care transition center after you. The Pamela Jeffrey Center for Foster Care Excellence. The state is impressed by our success rate. 92% of our scholarship recipients graduate from college, compared to less than 3% for the general foster care population. I felt tears prick my eyes. A year ago, if someone had told me that the worst betrayal of my life would lead to the greatest recognition of my work, I'd have thought they were insane. There's more, Dr. Williams continued. We've received inquiries from 3 other states wanting to replicate our model. And there's a documentary crew that wants to film the story of how the foundation overcame the scandal. What did you tell them? That I'd discuss it with our founder. I looked around the room at the young faces filled with hope and determination, at the donors who'd stood by us through the scandal, at the board members who'd worked tirelessly to rebuild trust. These people had become my real family, bound not by blood, but by shared purpose. Set up the interviews, I said. If our story can help other foundations protect themselves from internal corruption, then maybe something good will come from the pain my children caused. That evening, I was reviewing foundation reports in my home office when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Jeffrey? This is David Sterling, attorney for Marcus Jeffrey." The criminal defense lawyer Catherine had mentioned months ago. "Mr. Sterling." "Mrs. Jeffrey, I'm calling to discuss a potential civil lawsuit that my client is considering filing against you and the Jeffrey Foundation." I almost laughed. "On what grounds?" "Defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and wrongful termination. Mr. Jeffrey feels that your public statements about his alleged financial irregularities have damaged his reputation and employability." "His alleged financial irregularities?" "Mr. Sterling, we have bank records, transaction logs, and email evidence of systematic embezzlement. There's nothing alleged about it. My client maintains that what you characterize as theft was actually legitimate business expenses and salary adjustments that he was authorized to make as VP of Operations." I set down my pen and gave this absurd conversation my full attention. "Mr. Sterling, are you seriously calling to threaten me with a lawsuit because I exposed your client's crimes?" "We're exploring all legal options to restore Mr. Jeffrey's reputation and financial position. Here's a free legal consultation for you. Your client signed a resignation letter admitting to financial improprieties in exchange for not being prosecuted. He's lucky he's not in prison. If he wants to file a frivolous lawsuit, he's welcome to do so, but Catherine Hartwell will destroy him in court and then countersue for legal fees. Mrs. Jeffrey, tell your client that if he contacts me again, directly or through counsel, I'll reconsider my decision not to press criminal charges. Good evening, Mr. Sterling." I hung up and immediately called Catherine to give her a heads up about the potential lawsuit. She listened with what I could only describe as predatory interest. "Oh, please let him file," she said. "I would love nothing more than to depose Marcus under oath about his systematic theft. We destroy him so thoroughly that no legitimate law firm would ever represent him again." "You sound excited about the prospect. Pamela, In 30 years of practicing law, I've rarely seen a case where the facts are so clear and the defendant so obviously guilty. If Marcus wants to open himself up to civil litigation, we'll take everything he has left and give it to the foundation. The next morning brought a more pleasant surprise, a call from Margaret Chin, the donor Zoe had scammed. Pamela, I have a proposition for you. My foundation is hosting a conference on nonprofit governance and fraud prevention. We'd like you to be the keynote speaker. I'm flattered, but I'm not sure I'm the right person. You're exactly the right person. You're someone who faced internal fraud and not only exposed it but used the experience to strengthen your organization. The nonprofit world needs to hear how you did it. The conference was scheduled for the following month at the Georgia World Congress Center. I'd be speaking to over 500 nonprofit leaders, sharing the lessons learned from my children's betrayal and the foundation's recovery. As I prepared for the speech, I realized that Marcus and Zoe's crimes had given me something unexpected: expertise in nonprofit fraud prevention and a platform to help other organizations protect themselves from similar betrayals. The speech was titled, "When Trust Betrays: Rebuilding After Internal Fraud," and it drew the largest audience in the conference's history. I stood at the podium, looking out at hundreds of nonprofit leaders who were eager to learn from my experience. 6 months ago, I thought the worst thing that could happen to my foundation was external fraud, hackers, embezzlers, criminals from outside our organization. I never imagined that the greatest threat would come from the people I trusted most. For the next 45 minutes, I told the complete story. The gradual escalation of theft, the manipulation tactics my children had used, the warning signs I'd missed, and the systematic approach we'd taken to recovery. I shared the new financial controls we'd implemented, the governance changes we'd made, and the cultural shifts that had strengthened our mission. The response was overwhelming. During the Q&A session, dozens of nonprofit leaders shared their own experiences with internal fraud and asked for specific advice on prevention and recovery strategies. After the speech, I was approached by a publisher who wanted to turn my story into a book for nonprofit leaders. A consulting firm offered to partner with me to develop fraud prevention programs. 3 universities invited me to teach seminars on nonprofit governance. Most importantly, I was approached by Linda Morrison. I almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the weathered, hollow-eyed woman I'd met in the diner months earlier. This Linda had clear eyes, healthy skin, and the confident bearing of someone who'd found her footing. "Mrs. Jeffrey, I wanted you to know, I'm 6 months clean. I got a job at a nonprofit that helps women in recovery, and I've been attending meetings at a church near the house I'm renting." "You're renting?" "I sold the house Zoe bought me and gave the money back to the foundation, just like I promised. I'm living in a little apartment and paying my own way for the first time in years. It feels good." I studied this woman who'd been an unwitting pawn in Zoe's scheme, but had chosen to do the right thing when the truth came out. "Linda, I owe you an apology. I judged you harshly when I first learned about Zoe's plan to use you. I assumed you were just another person trying to take advantage of the situation. You had every right to judge me. I took money I knew wasn't honestly earned, even if I didn't know the full extent of what Zoe was doing. But you made it right. You chose integrity over comfort, and that takes courage." We talked for a few more minutes about her recovery, her work, and her hopes for rebuilding relationships with her other children. As she prepared to leave, she turned back to me. "Mrs. Jeffrey, I want you to know, Zoe was lucky to have you as her mother. I hope someday she's smart enough to realize what she threw away." That evening, I sat in my hotel room reviewing the speaking requests and consulting opportunities that had emerged from the conference. My phone rang with a call from Dr. Williams. "Penny, you need to see the evening news. Channel 2 is running a story about the foundation." I turned on the television to find a reporter standing outside the new foster care transition center, interviewing some of our scholarship recipients about the impact the foundation had made on their lives. The Jeffrey Foundation has become a model for other organizations, the reporter was saying. Despite facing internal fraud that could have destroyed a smaller nonprofit, they've emerged stronger and more effective than ever. The story featured interviews with Keisha, Deshawn, and several other scholarship recipients, all talking about how the foundation had changed their lives. Dr. Williams appeared on camera, discussing the new governance measures and the expansion of services. But it was the final interview that moved me to tears. Margaret Chen, speaking as chair of the nonprofit conference, said, "Pamela Jeffrey could have let this scandal destroy her life's work. Instead, she used it as an opportunity to build something better. She's shown that integrity and transparency aren't just moral imperatives, they're practical strategies for building trust and achieving mission success." As I watched the story, I realized that my children's betrayal had accomplished something they never intended. It had made me a stronger leader, a more effective advocate, and a more authentic person. Marcus and Zoe had tried to destroy my legacy. Instead, they'd helped me build a better one. 1 year after the family reunion that never happened, I received news that brought the story full circle. Both Marcus and Zoe were facing serious legal consequences that would define the rest of their lives. Catherine called me on a Tuesday morning with an update I'd been expecting for months. "Marcus just pleaded guilty to federal embezzlement charges," she said without preamble. "The civil lawsuit his attorney threatened? He dropped it after we filed a countersuit and began the discovery process." "What's his sentence?" 18 months in federal prison, 3 years supervised probation, and full restitution of $347,000 plus penalties. His attorney managed to get him a reduced sentence in exchange for the guilty plea and cooperation in identifying other financial irregularities. I felt an odd mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the little boy who used to climb into my lap to read bedtime stories. Relief that justice was finally being served for the crimes he'd committed. "And Zoe?" Catherine's tone grew grimmer. "Zoe's case is more complicated. She refused the initial plea deal and insisted on going to trial. The jury convicted her on all counts: fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, and conspiracy. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in federal prison. For years. My adopted daughter, whom I'd saved from the foster system, would spend her late 20s in prison because she couldn't stop stealing from the children she'd once been." "There's more," Catherine continued. "The federal prosecutor is recommending that other organizations review their relationships with the Morrison family. Apparently, Zoe's birth siblings have been running similar scams in other states. The corruption, it seemed, ran deeper than any of us had imagined." That afternoon, I drove to the federal courthouse where Marcus was scheduled for his final sentencing hearing. I hadn't seen him since the day he'd come to my office begging for money, and I wasn't sure why I felt compelled to be there now. I sat in the back of the courtroom as Marcus stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on his diminished frame. The confident, entitled man who'd thought he could steal his way to success had been replaced by someone who looked broken and small. His attorney made the standard plea for leniency, citing Marcus's cooperation with authorities and his expression of remorse. The prosecutor countered with a detailed recitation of his crimes and their impact on the Foundation's mission. But it was the judge's comments that struck me most forcefully. "Mr. Jeffrey," Judge Patricia Martinez said, "you were born into privilege and given every advantage. Your mother built a successful business and established a foundation to help vulnerable children. Instead of honoring that legacy, you chose to steal from the very people your family was trying to help." She paused, consulting her notes. "What makes your crimes particularly egregious is not just the theft itself, but the betrayal of trust. You didn't steal from strangers. You stole from your mother, from children in foster care, from a community that trusted your family's commitment to service." Marcus kept his head down throughout the judge's remarks, but I could see his shoulders shaking. "The court sentences you to 18 months in federal prison, to be followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You will make full restitution to the Jeffrey Foundation, and you are permanently barred from serving in any fiduciary capacity for any nonprofit organization. As the bailiff led Marcus away, he looked around the courtroom and his eyes found mine. For a moment, I saw the scared little boy who used to have nightmares about monsters under his bed. Then his expression hardened, and he looked away. I sat in my car in the courthouse parking garage for 20 minutes, processing what I'd just witnessed. My son was going to prison. Despite everything he'd done, despite the betrayal and the lies and the systematic theft, he was still my child, and watching him led away in shackles was one of the hardest things I'd ever experienced. But it was also necessary. Actions have consequences, and Marcus was finally facing the full weight of his choices. That evening, I attended the Jeffrey Foundation's annual gala, our biggest fundraising event of the year. The ballroom at the Four Seasons was packed with donors, community leaders, and scholarship recipients celebrating another year of success. Dr. Williams gave a presentation that took my breath away. In the year since taking over as executive director, she'd expanded our services to include job placement assistance, financial literacy programs, and mental health support. Our scholarship recipients weren't just graduating from college, they were thriving in careers and giving back to their communities. Tonight, Dr. Williams announced, I'm proud to report that the Jeffrey Foundation has achieved something unprecedented. Every single one of our current scholarship recipients is on track to graduate from college. 100%. The applause was thunderous. I looked around the room at faces filled with hope and determination, young people who'd been given a chance and were making the most of it, donors who'd stood by us through scandal and uncertainty, board members who'd worked tirelessly to rebuild trust. As the evening wound down, Keisha approached me near the silent auction tables. Mrs. Jeffrey, I wanted to tell you something. Next month, I'm graduating with my MSW. I've been accepted to the doctoral program at Emory, and I plan to specialize in child welfare policy. Keisha, that's wonderful. But more than that, I've been offered a position with the State Department of Human Services. I'll be working on reforming the foster care system, making sure other kids get the opportunities you gave me. I felt tears prick my eyes. Your parents would be so proud. You are proud, she said simply. You're the parent who made this possible. You saved me, Mrs. Jeffrey. Not just with money, but by showing me what it means to fight for something bigger than yourself. As the gala ended and guests began to leave, I found myself standing alone in the ballroom, surrounded by the remnants of a successful evening. Empty champagne glasses, auction bid sheets, programs scattered on tables. The detritus of hope transformed into action. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw the news about Marcus. Hope you're happy now. Probably Zoe, texting from prison. Even facing her own consequences, she couldn't resist one more attempt to make me feel guilty for exposing their crimes. I deleted the message without responding. Her opinion no longer mattered to me. What mattered was standing in that ballroom, surrounded by evidence of lives changed and futures secured. What mattered was knowing that the money Marcus and Zoe had stolen was now funding dreams instead of designer handbags. What mattered was the legacy I'd built not just despite their betrayal, but because of it. 2 years after the scandal broke, I stood in the boardroom of Jeffrey Industries, looking out at a management team that bore no resemblance to the family dynasty I'd once envisioned. My new CFO was Sarah Chen, a brilliant Stanford MBA who'd implemented financial controls so sophisticated that internal fraud was virtually impossible. My VP of operations was David Rodriguez, who'd grown up in foster care and understood better than anyone what the Foundation's work meant to vulnerable children. Gone were the nepotism and family entitlement that had enabled Marcus's theft. In their place was a culture of accountability, transparency, and merit-based advancement that had attracted some of the best talent in the logistics industry. The quarterly numbers are exceptional, Sarah reported. Revenue is up 23% year over year, and we've expanded operations into 3 new markets. More importantly, employee satisfaction is at an all-time high. The irony wasn't lost on me, breaking bread while discussing broken trust. The children are claiming you've had some kind of breakdown, Karen began carefully, that you're making wild accusations about them stealing money. I set down my coffee cup and pulled out my phone, opening the email Catherine had sent me that morning with updated financial evidence. Wild accusations? I forwarded the email to both of them. Read that. For the next 20 minutes, I watched my siblings' faces change as they reviewed bank statements, transaction records, and email evidence of systematic theft and betrayal. Karen's southern gentility cracked first. Sweet Jesus, she breathed. Marcus took $300,000? $347,000. I corrected. And Zoe's been destroying the foundation while stealing from children who needed scholarships. Michael's lawyer brain kicked into high gear. This is ironclad evidence of multiple felonies. Wire fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion. They're looking at serious prison time. Not if I don't prosecute. Both siblings looked up sharply. You're not pressing charges? Karen asked. That depends entirely on how this family chooses to handle the situation. Michael leaned back, understanding dawning in his eyes. You want something from them. What? I smiled, feeling the satisfaction of a chess player revealing a long-planned strategy. I want complete acknowledgement of what they've done. I want public apology. I want every stolen dollar returned with interest. And I want them to understand that their actions have consequences that will last the rest of their lives. And if they refuse?
Karen asked.
Then Catherine Hartwell will file criminal charges Monday morning, and they'll spend the next 5 to 10 years in federal prison explaining to their cellmates how they stole from foster children.
My phone rang.
Zoe calling again. Michael, I said, you answer it. Put it on speaker. Let's hear what she has to say. Michael answered with his courtroom voice. Uncle Michael here. Your mother is with me and Aunt Karen. Oh, thank God. Zoe's voice was shaky, panicked. Uncle Michael, Mom is having some kind of breakdown. She's making crazy accusations and threatening legal action. We need your help. Karen and Michael exchanged glances. They'd just seen the evidence. What exactly is she accusing you of? Michael asked. She thinks I've been stealing from the foundation, which is insane. I've been working there for free, basically. And she's claiming Marcus took money from the company, which is just her being paranoid about normal business expenses. The blatant lies in the face of overwhelming evidence made my siblings' expressions harden. Zoe, Karen said softly, we've seen the financial records. Silence. What financial records? Zoe's voice had gone small. The bank statements showing foundation money being used to buy Linda Morrison a house, Michael said with prosecutorial precision. The fake vendor accounts Marcus created. The offshore transfers. All of it. The sound Zoe made was somewhere between a sob and a gasp. You don't understand. I understand that you stole $125,000 from foster children and then called your mother crazy for discovering it, Karen said, her southern accent sharpening with anger. I understand that you bought yourself a fake birth mother to justify treating the woman who raised you like garbage. We can explain everything. No, Michael cut her off. You can't, because there is no explanation for this level of betrayal. Your mother gave you everything, and you repaid her by stealing from her and humiliating her. But Linda is my real mother. Linda Morrison is a drug addict who abandoned you and 3 other children, I said, taking the phone. I have her entire history from the adoption proceedings. She signed away her parental rights voluntarily after failing court-ordered rehabilitation multiple times. Silence. The house you bought her? She's already taken out a second mortgage and is planning to sell it. She's using you, Zoe, just like you used me. The call ended abruptly. Karen shook her head in disgust. Those ungrateful little. Language, dear, Michael said mildly, but his eyes were hard. Pamela, what do you need from us? I need you to understand that when this becomes public, and it will become public, there are only two sides to this story. The side that supports someone who loved her children unconditionally, and the side that supports thieves who stole from foster children. Where do we stand?
Karen asked.
With our sister, Michael said firmly. Always. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. We need to meet. Tonight. This has gone too far. I showed the message to my siblings. He's ready to negotiate, Michael observed. Good, I said, standing. Because tomorrow, the real consequences begin. That evening, I agreed to meet Marcus and Zoe at Marcus's loft downtown. But I didn't go alone. Catherine accompanied me, carrying a briefcase full of legal documents that would change my children's lives forever. The loft was everything I'd expected from money Marcus had stolen: exposed brick, floor-to-ceiling windows, designer furniture that cost more than most people's cars. He'd built himself a lifestyle on theft and betrayal, and now it was all going to come crashing down. Both my children looked haggard, aged by stress, and the growing realization that their carefully planned coup had backfired spectacularly. Zoe's eyes were red from crying. Marcus looked like he hadn't slept in days. Mom, Zoe began, we need to talk about this rationally. Rationally? I set Catherine's briefcase on the dining table. Let's be rational. Catherine, would you explain to my children what rational consequences look like? Catherine opened the briefcase with the precision of a surgeon preparing for an operation. Marcus Jeffrey and Zoe Morrison. Yes, Zoe, you'll need to change your name since you're no longer a Jeffrey. You are both facing federal charges for embezzlement, wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. The color drained from both their faces. The evidence is overwhelming. The prosecution rate for cases like this is 97%. You're looking at 5 to 10 years in federal prison, followed by a lifetime of explaining to employers why you're convicted felons. But if we pay the money back, Marcus started. Returning stolen property doesn't erase the crime, Catherine said coldly. It might reduce your sentence to the minimum 5 years. Zoe collapsed into a chair, finally understanding the magnitude of what they'd done. However, I said, I'm prepared to offer you an alternative. Hope flickered in their eyes. Complete public confession and apology. Full restitution plus 50% penalty. Resignation from all positions in the family business and foundation. And you live with the knowledge that you threw away a family who loved you for money you were too greedy to earn honestly. And in exchange? Marcus asked weakly. I don't press charges. You avoid prison. But you also live the rest of your lives knowing exactly what you lost and why you lost it. They looked at each other, these children I'd raised, and I saw something die in their eyes. The entitlement, the assumption that love would shield them from consequences, the belief that they could manipulate their way out of anything. We need time to think, Zoe whispered. You have until Monday morning, Catherine said. After that, the decision gets made for you. As we left that loft, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began. Peace. Not the peace of resolution, but the peace that comes from knowing you fought back with everything you have. My children had chosen their path when they decided to steal from me and humiliate me. Now, they would live with the consequences of that choice forever. 5 years after the text message that changed everything, I stood at the podium of the Georgia World Congress Center, addressing an audience of over 2,000 nonprofit leaders from across the country. The annual National Philanthropy Conference had invited me to deliver the keynote address on transforming crisis into opportunity. Behind me, a massive screen displayed the Jeffrey Foundation's statistics, 847 young people served, 92% college graduation rate, $12 million in scholarships awarded, and a 98% employment rate for program graduates. What the numbers didn't show was the human transformation, lives rebuilt, futures secured, and a legacy that would outlast any family name. When I started the Jeffrey Foundation, I thought success would be measured in dollars donated and degrees earned. I never imagined that our greatest achievement would be proving that integrity isn't just the right choice, it's the practical choice. In the front row sat Dr. Williams, now recognized as one of the nation's leading experts on foster care transition programs. Beside her sat Keisha, who'd completed her doctorate and was now running similar programs in 3 other states. Deshaun had launched his own nonprofit construction company, building affordable housing for aging-out foster youth. 5 years ago, this foundation faced internal fraud that could have destroyed our mission. Instead, it forced us to build something stronger, more transparent, and more effective than what we'd lost. I clicked to the next slide, showing before and after organizational charts. We replaced family loyalty with institutional integrity. We replaced trust without verification with systems that ensure accountability. And we replaced the assumption that good intentions prevent bad actions with the knowledge that good structures prevent good people from making bad choices. The audience was rapt, taking notes and nodding as I outlined the specific governance changes we'd implemented. But the real power of the story wasn't in the operational details. It was in the demonstration that crisis could catalyze transformation. Today, I want to talk about the most difficult lesson I've learned, that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who teach us the most about who we really are. I paused, looking out at faces that represented decades of service to vulnerable populations. My children's betrayal taught me that love without boundaries enables destruction. Their theft taught me that trust without verification invites corruption. Their attempts to destroy my reputation taught me that integrity under attack becomes stronger, not weaker. After the speech, I was surrounded by nonprofit leaders sharing their own stories of betrayal, recovery, and institutional renewal. A foundation director from California described uncovering embezzlement by her board chair. A shelter operator from Texas talked about rebuilding after a financial scandal involving family members. The common thread, observed Dr. Patricia Hernandez from the Urban Institute, is that organizations that survive internal fraud don't just return to their previous state, they evolve into something more resilient. That evening, at the conference's awards dinner, I received the National Philanthropy Leadership Award for transforming personal crisis into systemic improvement that has elevated standards across the nonprofit sector. As I held the Crystal Award, I thought about the woman who'd read that devastating text message 5 years ago. She'd been hurt, confused, and questioning her own worth. The woman standing at this podium had answers to all those questions and the recognition to prove them. But the real vindication came the next morning when I returned to Atlanta to find a letter waiting on my desk. The return address was a federal correctional facility in Alabama. "Dear Mom," it began, and I almost stopped reading there. But something in the careful handwriting made me continue. "I know I have no right to call you that anymore, but I don't know what else to call the woman who raised me for 22 years before I threw it all away. I've been in prison for 3 years now, and I've spent that time thinking about what I did and why I did it. Not just the stealing, but the cruelty. The way I treated you, the lies I told about Linda, the pain I caused to kids who needed help. I've been working in the prison's literacy program, teaching other inmates to read. Many of them grew up in foster care, and they've told me what organizations like your foundation mean to people who age out of the system with nothing. I've heard about Marcus working as a volunteer, about how he's changed. I've heard about the foundation's success, about the awards you've won, about the lives you've saved. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I'm writing to tell you that I finally understand what I lost. Not just money or comfort or family connections. I lost the chance to be part of something meaningful, something that helped people who needed help. I get out in 8 months. I don't expect you to welcome me back. I don't expect you to trust me or love me or even acknowledge me. But I want you to know that if you ever have work that needs doing, cleaning, filing, whatever, I'll do it for free for as long as you'll let me. I can't undo what I did to those kids, but maybe I can spend the rest of my life trying to help other kids like them.
I'm sorry, Mom.
Not sorry I got caught, sorry for what I did. Sorry for hurting you. Sorry for betraying the foundation. Sorry for being the kind of person who stole from children. I hope someday I can prove that prison taught me what love and privilege couldn't. Your daughter, if you'll still let me use that word.
Zoe.
I set the letter down and walked to my office windows, looking out at the city I'd conquered twice, once as a young entrepreneur building a business, and again as a mature woman rebuilding a reputation.
My phone rang.
Dr. Williams calling from the foundation offices. Penny, I just got off the phone with the most interesting caller. A federal judge in Alabama, asking about our volunteer policies for formerly incarcerated individuals. Judge Martinez? How did you know? I smiled, still holding Zoe's letter. Lucky guess. What did you tell her? That we evaluate volunteers based on their current commitment to our mission, not their past mistakes. Why? Because I think we're about to find out if prison can teach lessons that privilege couldn't. That afternoon, I drove to the warehouse where Marcus had been working for 3 years since his release. He'd started on the night shift at minimum wage and worked his way up to day supervisor, earning his colleagues' respect through consistency and humility rather than charm and connections. I found him in the break room, eating lunch alone while reviewing foundation files. He'd been volunteering 20 hours a week, working with scholarship recipients on financial literacy and career planning. Marcus, I said, settling into the plastic chair across from him. He looked up, surprised. In 3 years of supervised volunteer work, I'd maintained professional distance, watching his progress, but not engaging personally.
Mom.
Is everything okay? I received a letter from Zoe today. His expression grew serious. She's written to me a few times. The last letters sounded different. Less angry, more honest. She gets out in 8 months. I know. Dr. Williams says you've been exemplary as a volunteer. The scholarship recipients trust you, the staff respects you, and you've never missed a commitment. Marcus set down his sandwich. It's the best part of my week. Seeing those kids work so hard for opportunities one took for granted, it reminds me why the work matters. Do you think Zoe has changed? He considered the question carefully. I think prison broke something in her that needed to be broken. The entitlement, the assumption that she could manipulate her way out of consequences. Whether she's built something better in its place, I don't know. What would you recommend? The same thing you did for me. A chance to prove herself through actions, not words. Strict supervision, clear boundaries, and the understanding that trust has to be earned back one day at a time. I studied this man who'd once been my son, trying to reconcile him with the entitled thief who'd planned to humiliate me at a family reunion. 3 years of honest work and genuine service had changed him in ways I'd never thought possible. Marcus, there's something I need to tell you. Mother is updating her will. The trust funds she'd established for you and Zoe are being redirected to the foundation permanently. He nodded without surprise. I figured. We forfeited any claim to family money when we chose to steal it. But there's more. She's also establishing a new fund, the Second Chances Scholarship, for formerly incarcerated individuals who want to pursue education or job training. That's wonderful. The fund will be administered by someone who understands both the challenges of reentry and the value of redemption through service. He looked up sharply. You want me to run it? I want you to consider it. It would be a paid position, with full benefits and real responsibility. But it would also mean acknowledging publicly that you're a convicted felon who's trying to make amends. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, processing the offer. Would Zoe be eligible for the program when she gets out? If she meets the criteria, demonstrated commitment to service, completion of educational requirements, and recommendation from program supervisors, then yes. Then I'll do it. Not because I want the job, but because those kids deserve someone who understands what it's like to hit bottom and claw your way back up. 6 months later, I stood in the same federal courthouse where I'd watched Marcus sentenced to prison, waiting for Zoe's release. She'd completed her sentence and would be starting as an unpaid intern at the Foundation's new reentry support program. I wasn't there for reconciliation. That would take years to rebuild, if ever. I was there because Dr. Williams believed former inmates needed familiar faces when they re-entered the world, and despite everything, I was still the closest thing to family Zoe had. When she walked out of the prison transport van, I barely recognized her. Gone was the entitled young woman who'd called me crazy for discovering her theft. This Zoe moved with humility, kept her eyes down, and approached me with the careful respect of someone who understood they were being given an unearned gift. "Mrs. Jeffrey," she said formally. "Not Mom. Not even Pamela. Thank you for coming. Dr. Williams thought it would help with your transition." "It does. More than you know." We drove to the halfway house where she'd be living for the next 6 months, making small talk about the Foundation's work and her plans for the future. She asked thoughtful questions about the scholarship recipients and listened carefully to my answers. "Mrs. Jeffrey," she said as I dropped her off, "I know I don't have the right to ask this, but would you tell the kids I stole from that I'm sorry? Not because I want forgiveness, but because they deserve to know that someone recognizes the harm that was done to them." "I'll tell them. And if I prove myself worthy of a second chance, if I work hard and serve honestly and show that I've changed, would you consider letting me earn my way back into this family?" I looked at this stranger who shared my last name, thinking about the journey from entitled thief to humble supplicant. It had taken federal prison to teach her lessons that love and opportunity couldn't. "Zoe, family isn't something you earn your way back into. It's something you choose to honor through your actions. If you choose to honor the Jeffrey name through service to others, then maybe someday we can choose to be family again." As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the remarkable transformation that had emerged from the worst betrayal of my life. My business was more ethical and profitable than ever. The Foundation had become a national model for foster care transition programs. And my children, both of them, were finally learning the values I'd tried to teach them decades earlier. It had taken losing everything for them to understand what they'd had. It had taken their betrayal for me to discover who I really was. I stood at the podium of the newly opened Jeffrey Institute for Nonprofit Excellence, looking out at an audience that included scholarship recipients who'd become successful professionals, formerly incarcerated individuals who'd rebuilt their lives through education and service, and nonprofit leaders from around the world who'd come to study our model. Behind me sat Marcus, now the respected director of the Second Chances program, and Zoe, who'd earned her way to coordinator of the Reentry Support Initiative after 3 years of exemplary service. They weren't my children anymore. That innocent trust had been destroyed forever. But they'd become something better, colleagues in service, partners in redemption, and living proof that consequences can catalyze transformation. When I received that text message 7 years ago, I said, concluding my remarks, telling me I was being cut from my own family, I thought my story was ending. I never imagined it was actually beginning. I looked at the young faces in the audience, former foster children who'd become doctors and teachers and engineers, former inmates who'd become counselors and mentors and advocates. The greatest revenge isn't destroying the people who hurt you. It's building something so meaningful, so powerful, so transformative that their betrayal becomes the foundation for your greatest achievements. The standing ovation lasted 5 full minutes. As it finally subsided, I caught sight of my mother in the front row, now 93 and still sharp as ever, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. After the ceremony, as guests mingled in the reception hall, a young woman approached me. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her immediately. Mrs. Jeffrey?
I'm Sarah Morrison.
Linda's daughter, Zoe's birth sister. I studied her face, seeing the resemblance now.
Sarah.
How are you? I'm graduating from nursing school next month, thanks to a scholarship from your Second Chances program. I wanted to thank you for giving people like me, people with complicated family histories, a chance to build something better. What are your plans after graduation? I'm going to work in pediatric care, specializing in children who've experienced trauma. My family's mistakes taught me how much damage broken adults can do to innocent kids. I want to help heal that damage. As the evening wound down, I found myself standing alone on the Institute's terrace, looking out at the Atlanta skyline. 7 years ago, I'd been a woman whose children had tried to destroy her life's work. Tonight, I was someone whose life's work had transformed even her children. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw the news coverage of tonight's event. Congratulations on building something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. You're an inspiration to everyone who's ever been hurt by family. A fellow survivor. I smiled, thinking about all the people who'd reached out over the years with similar stories of family betrayal and institutional recovery. The Jeffrey model had been replicated in dozens of cities, helping thousands of organizations prevent and recover from internal fraud. But more than that, our story had given hope to people who'd thought betrayal meant defeat. We'd proven that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing you ever build. As I prepared to leave, Marcus and Zoe approached me together. They moved with the easy partnership of colleagues who'd learned to work together despite their complicated history. Mrs. Jeffrey, Marcus said, we wanted to thank you for tonight, for this opportunity, for not giving up on the possibility that we could become people worthy of the Jeffrey name. And for teaching us, Zoe added, that family isn't about blood or biology. It's about showing up, keeping promises, and fighting for something bigger than yourself. I looked at these two people who'd once been my children, then become my greatest enemies, and had finally earned their way to being my colleagues in service. Their transformation hadn't erased the pain they'd caused, but it had given it meaning. You taught me something too, I said. You taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the full consequences of their choices. Love without boundaries isn't love, it's enabling. And, Marcus added with a smile, you taught us that Pamela Jeffrey is not someone you want to cross. I laughed. No, I'm really not. As we walked toward the parking garage together, I reflected on the journey from that devastating text message to this moment of professional triumph and personal peace. My children had tried to cut me from their family, and in the process, they'd helped me build a family of thousands of people committed to service over self-interest. They'd thought they were ending my story. Instead, they'd given me the plot twist that transformed it from a tale of comfortable success into an epic of redemption, justice, and ultimate victory. Sometimes the best revenge really is living so well that your enemies become irrelevant. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they might even become allies in building something better than what they tried to destroy. Thank you for watching this story unfold. If this tale of betrayal, justice, and ultimate triumph moved you, please subscribe to Her True Stories and let me know in the comments what part resonated most with you. Remember, sometimes our greatest victories come from our worst defeats, and sometimes the family we choose is stronger than the family we're born into.